Okay, hello everyone. This is Gregory Muna, aka Master Mu, with our weekly podcast update for Art is the Church of God the Creator, where we say that with a smile, but we also smile because we mean it. And we'll explore the meaning of what we say when we mean what we say when we say art is the church of God the Creator. That's not denying the validity of other churches, but we are definitely articulating that art is our church, and that for us, for you, for me, for the listeners, art is not just entertainment, it's not just a way to pass the time, it's not escapism. It is a way to directly work with our sense perceptions in the best possible way for human beings. And that, in theological terms, we view that as an entryway to the divine. We view this as a portal to the totality of God through artistic beauty. And then from that portal, we have access to the other four portals from our portal of our senses or perceptions, through a non-dual relationship to our senses. We are able to then enter into the totality of a non-dual understanding of God, which is also the non-duality of emotions, which is goodness, the non-duality of rational thought, which is truth, the non-duality of our autonomic functions, which is love, and the totality of our subconscious survival drives, which is joy. And then there is the non-dual totality of all five, of truth, beauty, goodness, joy, and the truth. Okay, so we are up to our update for the Parable of the Sower. Let's get that on the screen. Parable of the Sower, Octavia E. Butler. Her fantastic classic, 1992-1993, of near future fiction for her. She died in the early aughts, but present day prophecy for us. And today's entry on page 98, and this is chapter 9, describing the events of the year 2025, taking us to the end of 2025. There are two more entries. The penultimate entry is dated today, Saturday, October 25th, 2025. It's very short. It's just 2 paragraphs. We're going to read it. And then we're going to look at Aristotle's comments in his Poetics on character and the subsidiary elements of drama. We already discussed the primary element of drama, plot, and looking how this relates to character and diction and some of the other elements. So, all right. So once again, for those of you who have been reading Parable of the Sower, we're following the protagonist, Lauren Olamina, and it's a Bildungsroman. It's showing her development. It's the portrait of the prophet, or the religious leader, as a young woman. So it's Butler has audaciously tried to imagine a future religion and to look at the founder of that future religion, and then imagine her at a earlier state, immature development, as an adolescent, and trying to understand like the adolescent psychology of someone who is later revered as a great religious teacher or a great prophet. And it uses as an intertext that we've discussed before, the parable of the sower, which is one of Jesus's parables about the scattering seeds, the seeds of teaching, and how they have different results depending upon the reception, the soil, which obviously represents the people who receive teachings. But at this point in the narrative, she's relating a family drama. She has five brothers, and her brother Keith is sort of her Cain and Abel, kind of her negative twin, or kind of her doppelganger. Lauren is intelligent but hyper empathetic, to the point of a disability. When she becomes aware of someone else's pain, she experiences it physically in a way which is very painful for her. It's like almost like a stigmata, among them, like the medieval saints. And in the narrative, this is ascribed to an abnormal neurological development. Perhaps her mother was abusing substances, in utero. So that's left that may possibly have a physiological cause. Her brother Keith is like her, is ambitious and intelligent, but is completely unempathetic, is very cold and narcissistic, and you can say, has a personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder. He completely lacks empathy. I don't want to use words like psychopathy, although she refers to him as a psychopath, because those are very, perhaps, emotionally overly laden words. So, okay. So she's talking about the internal family dynamic of the antisocial, narcissistic, sort of sadistic psychopath in the family, and how that wreaks havoc upon the family structure. So Saturday, October 25th, 2025. Keith has gone out again. He went yesterday afternoon. Corey didn't admit until tonight that he took not only her key this time, but her gun. He took the Smith & Wesson. Dad refused to go out and look for him. Dad slept in his office last night. He's sleeping there again tonight. I never liked my brother much. I hate him now for what he's doing to the family, for what he's doing to my father. I hate him. Damn, I hate him. Okay. So, very simple language, very simple declarative sentences for page 98, chapter 9 of Octavia Butler's Parable of Sower for Saturday, October 25th. We're checking in with the narrative here, and we're going to be looking at the narrative and the characters in terms of Aristotle's criteria for narrative literature that which he explores in his Poetics. And in terms of the diary entry I just read, again, this novel is structured not only as a Bildungsroman, but as a fictional journal, a fictional diary of the protagonist, Lauren. So that's the that's the first person narrator of this. Keith is her brother, Corey is her stepmother, Corazon. And the family dynamic is that despite the fact that Lauren hates Keith, her brother, is the favorite of the mother, and has been indulged by the father, but now the father is freezing him out. He's not going out to look for him. He's sleeping in the end, and he's so the father is shutting him out emotionally, is basically giving him up for lost here. So it says Dad slept in his office, he's sleeping out there tonight, and then she ends with this hate. I hate him, damn, I hate him. She uses that actually theological language, damn, like she's really calling down a kind of a curse upon him. Yeah. So briefly, just the characters in that are the stepmother Corey, the father Dad, the narrator Lauren, and the brother Keith, who is essentially her negative double. It's a very, very interesting sort of parallel structure in the narrative, and we can think about biblical sibling rivalries, Cain and Abel, the prodigal son, and these various other parables of alienated family structure. Right. The All right, that's enough. We'll come back to Parable of the Sower for the next entry, which is dated Monday, November 3rd, 2025. So a week from Monday. So hopefully we'll have some more developments there. Let's see. What would Aristotle have to say? There's definitely fear and pity in this situation because Keith took the gun, and Keith has been active in the character Keith in Parable of Sower has been involved in illegal activity, and there is horror outside the family gates because they live in a gated community in this fictional 2025, outside of which there are derelict homeless people who are half alive, half dead, starving, desperate, criminal, and so on. And so in the previous chapters, when they left the gates, there was sort of spectacular, horrific imagery of people who were wasting away and attacking, and also of violence and so on. And those are typical elements in Hollywood and commercial, movies and stuff like that, and video games when they want you to experience fear and pity, often using special effects and blood and guts and stuff like that. But Butler wants us to understand this on an inner, more psychological way. What does Aristotle have to say? In section 14 of the Poetics, Aristotle says, fear and pity may be aroused by spectacular means, but they may also result from the inner structure of the piece, which is the better way and indicates a superior poet. Okay, so what does he mean here when he says fear and pity may be aroused by spectacular means? He means like horror movie, blood and guts in your face, explosions, noises, screaming, violence, all of that sort of stuff. Yes, sure. When you see that visually and it's very noisy and it's very loud, or if you're in a theater and there's orchestra playing and suddenly there's a very loud cymbal clash or drums or some very loud noise that I'm prepared at, that also triggers fear and pity, like on a sonic sense. Any sort of unprepared, unexpected visual or sonic or tactile or an unexpected odor, an unexpected any sort of thing like that can arouse fear and pity. And in stage, it's usually when Aristotle uses the word spectacular, he's referring to the visual element of staging, which the Greek word, as we said last time, is opsis, right? The optical, bright blinding lights, smoke, strobing lights, huge explosion noises, all those sorts of things that might happen, or like the sudden appearance of stage blood or all right. So that can work, but the better way, Aristotle says, is the arising from the inner structure of the piece, indicates the superior poet. He says, for the plot ought to be so constructed that even without the aid of the eye, he who hears the tale told will thrill with horror and melt to pity at what takes place. Okay, so the horror and the pity of the situation is that this intact nuclear family structure in Parable of the Sower is being torn apart by the self-centered psychopathic actions of the Lawrence brother Keith, one of the five siblings there, and that is a family tragedy. Yeah. And that is what and the subtlety of the horror is that Keith, as I said, is very similar in many respects to Lauren. They have a similar intelligence, and they have sort of a similar sense of self-ambition and all of that, but they have radically divergent psychological propensities, and Lauren's hyper-empathy versus his non-empathy. Okay. I'm not going to read the rest of section 14 because we read it last time, but that is, he uses that as to talk about Oedipus. If you're reading the Oedipus of Sophocles, let's just recap what Aristotle has to say about Sophocles' Oedipus. The impression we should receive from hearing the story. This is the impression we should receive from hearing the story of the Oedipus. But to produce the effect of by the mere spectacle is a less artistic method and depends upon extraneous age. Those who employ spectacular means to create a sense not only of the terrible, but to create a sense not of the terrible, but only of the monstrous, are strangers to the purpose of tragedy. Okay, those who employ spectacular means to create a sense not of the terrible, but only of the monstrous, are strangers to the purpose of tragedy. For we must not demand of tragedy any and every kind of pleasure, but only that which is proper to it. Okay, Aristotle is talking about visual. Now, his theater was a well-funded theater. There were fairly advanced stage machinery existed in the classical Greek period. We have documentary evidence of, all sorts of things that the what we call the Deus ex machina, like gods appearing and cranes suspended above the stage, and all these things which got oohs and ahs from the audience. But he's saying that the special effects in tragedy should create that sense of the terrible, of the pity and fear, not just the monstrous. So not displaying monsters. So he's drawing a distinction between what we would call sort of like the monster genre, like science fiction monster genre, and what we would call a genuine tragedy. We're drawing distinctions here between modern genres of horror and monster movies, versus, in tragedy, the monster lurks within the protagonist's own subconscious. So the monstrous aspect, and so you may ask, well, in Oedipus, what about the descriptions of actual supernatural monsters like the Sphinx, right? And Aristotle would say that to properly understand the Sphinx, we have to understand it not as the monstrous, but as the tragic. We have to understand the Sphinx as a representative of what is repressed in the subconscious, which is unbearable to admit in the conscious mind. That the Sphinx represents the subconscious terror, the irrational nature of terror itself, which Oedipus is able to master through his conscious rationality, his logic. So that is from an Aristotelian perspective, the meaning of the narrative of the Sphinx, Oedipus and the Sphinx and the riddles of the Sphinx, which means that we have to have a symbolic understanding of the riddle, the Sphinx's riddle, what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 at noon, and 3 in the evening, right? And the correct answer is man. And the irony, the tragic irony, is that Oedipus has enough logic to correctly answer the riddle. He's logically able to understand that the riddle represents the infant at the daybreak of life. The day represents the life of a human being, and that daybreak is infancy, crawling on all fours, and then at the midpoint of adult maturity, walking on 2 legs, he who walks independently, right? And then at dusk, at the close of day, on 3, that's the old man with the walking stick. He correctly answers that, but the Sphinx does not rejoice in the correct answer. The Sphinx commits suicide. The female Sphinx jumps off the cliff. And why does the Sphinx doesn't just die, the Sphinx commits suicide? And that's also ironic. Why is that? Perhaps, and I'm saying it is, in my interpretation, definitely, that the Sphinx understands that Oedipus has enough mastery of mind to not give into terror and to be able to think clearly in the moment of terror in the embrace of the Sphinx, but he does not have the wisdom. He does not, in other words, Oedipus possesses arete. Oedipus possesses excellence. His specific excellence is his logical ability to solve logical problems and to stay cool, right? But he does not possess gnosis. He does not possess self-knowledge, because the person with self-knowledge, answering that correctly, would understand that the human who crawls on 4 in infancy, who stands on 2, and then 3, with the crawling off the staff at the end, that the corrector answer of man, that the meaning behind the riddle is that this is a foreshadowing of his own fate, that he is the man. Oedipus is the archetypal man who crawled on 4 as an infant and whose feet were bound and who was left in the wilderness to die. He is the vainglorious, self-sustaining, steadfast hero of his youth and adulthood, standing on his own 2 feet, who slays the Sphinx and becomes the king of Thebes and has the beautiful wife and the children and lives in the palace and is admired by all, and who says that he did it all on his own, just with his intellect, not with any outside source, not by heredity or anything else. And Oedipus is the man at evening who crawls off with the stick, because as we see him at the end of the play, he's blinded, he's ripped his eyes out, and he staggers off stage left with his cane, being observed at this point at the end only by Tiresias. Tiresias is aware of the situation. Tiresias is blind. Yeah. And he understands, in other words, he has the excellence to answer the riddle, but he lacks the wisdom, he lacks the faith, he lacks the gnosis to understand the meaning behind the answer. And that is the poetic meaning of the pity and the fear. Now, the spectacular element of Oedipus, of course, is the blood and the guts and the horror of it. And the most spectacular moment of the entire play is when the palace doors swing open and we see after we hear the noise and the screaming and the horror, we see the dead body of Jocasta hanging, and we see Oedipus staggering out, having ripped his eyes out with Jocasta's girdle hooks in his eyes, and the blood gushing out of his eyes and going down his clothes and all over the floor. That's the blood. That's the spectacular. That's an example of fear and pity being aroused by spectacular means. But if that's only just the monstrous, as Aristotle would say, we would just be laughing at that. It would just be a ridiculously over-the-top thing. But because of the plot's superior construction, we're able to experience pity and fear through the structure of the poem itself, through the words, and so that's a way of understanding what Aristotle is saying here in section 14. He says, and since the pleasure which the poet should afford is that which comes from pity and fear through imitation, it is evident that this quality must be impressed upon the incidents. Okay, and then again, this is, we read this last time. The actions capable of this effect must happen between persons who are either friends or... We talked about this, that the characteristics of the noble hero, of the family, betrayal of the family bonds, okay? Obviously, this relates to parable of the sower, so I'll just reread what Aristotle says. He says, actions capable of this effect must happen between persons who are either friends or enemies or indifferent to one another. If an enemy kills an enemy, there is nothing to excite either in the act or the intention, except so far as the suffering in itself is pitiful. So again, with indifferent persons. But when the tragic incident occurs between those who are near and dear to one another, if, for example, a brother kills or intends to kill a brother or son his father, a mother or son, a son his mother, any other deed of this kind is done, then these are the situations to be looked for by the poet. And indeed, Octavia Butler does exactly that. She looks at the family dynamic of what is initially an intact, happy family in a dangerous world, led by a virtuous, noble father and a loving mother. Corazon, her name represents her heart, or her softness, that despite the misdeeds of the brother Keith, she still loves him and supports him, and becomes unwittingly accessory to his crime when he steals the gun from her, right? So this is a conflict between the heroic brother and the rest of the family, rejecting his sister, rejecting the authority of his noble father, and abusing the kindness of his loving stepmother, right? And he goes out and becomes a criminal, and he kills, and the father is shutting himself off and is becoming indifferent to whatever negative results may happen, which we're going to find out soon, which is, of course, he comes to a tragic end. And that Keith may have been a tragic hero, except for his fatal flaw, his lack of empathy, his belief in his invincibility, and his belief that he can commit crimes with impunity. Yeah, so that's his hubris, and his hamartia is then the actions that he commits under the delusion of hubris. Hubris is delusion. Hubris is dualistic self-delusion, the idea that one is superior to others, and therefore rules of morality and behavior do not apply to oneself. That's what hubris is the precondition to commit crimes with impunity. Yes, without fear for consequences, and all the tragic heroes have that. Oedipus has that. When he arrives at the crossroads, he believes that he is the superior young man. He is the son of the king of Corinth, or so he's been raised to believe. He meets an old man disguised at the crossroads, and demands the right of way, and they get into a fight, and he winds up killing the old man and his entourage, and then later we discover that was his actual father, Laius. So he unwittingly becomes a parasite. Okay, spoiler alert. So drawing a parallel between the family dynamics in the Oedipus of Sophocles and the parable of the sower by Octavia Butler. Back to Aristotle. He may not indeed destroy the framework of the received legends. The fact, for instance, that Clytemnestra was slain by Orestes and Eryphile by Alcman, but he ought to show invention of his own and skillfully handle the traditional material. Let us explain more clearly what is meant by skillful handling. The action may be done consciously and with knowledge of the persons in the manner of the older poets. It is thus, too, that Euripides makes Medea slay her children. Or again, the deed of horror may be done, but done in ignorance, and the tie of kinship or friendship may be discovered afterwards. The Oedipus of Sophocles is an example. So Medea slays her children, of course, knowing that they're her children. Oedipus murders his father and commits incest with his mother, only discovering the truth afterwards. Here, indeed, the incident is outside the drama proper, but cases occur where it falls within the action of the play. One may cite the Alcmaeon of Estidamus, Telegonus of the wounded Odysseus. Again, there is a third case, to be about to act with knowledge of the persons, then not to act. The fourth case is when someone is about to do an irreparable deed through ignorance and makes the discovery before it is done. These are the only possible ways. So tragedy fulfilled or tragedy averted, right? And he's saying that the ones which arouse the greatest pity and fear are 1 and 2, when there is knowledge of foreknowledge of the level of kinship, or when there is committed in ignorance. but where the tragic deeds are committed, not averted. For the deed must either be done or not done, and that wittingly or unwittingly. So those are the four possibilities, the four logical possibilities. Does a terrible deed occur? Does it not occur? Was it done in knowledgeably, or without knowledge? Of all these ways, to be about to act, knowing the persons, and then not to act is the worst. Okay, it is shocking without being tragic, for no disaster follows. It is therefore never or very rarely found in poetry. One instance, however, is in the Antigone, where Haemon threatens to kill Creon, but does not kill Creon. Okay, of course that's the whole, the fate of Creon, of course, is very important to the whole, the Oedipus cycle and the whole Theban cycle. So, that's perhaps another reason why Creon is not killed. The next and better way is that the deed should be perpetrated. All right, so now he's looking at examples that he's given, like Medea. Still better, it should be perpetrated in ignorance, and the discovery be made afterwards. And so he's saying, like the plot of Oedipus Sophocles, that's the best. Then is nothing to shock us, while the discovery produces a startling effect. The last case is the best, as when Cresphontes Merope is about to slay her son, but recognizing who spares his life. So it is in the Iphigenia, when the sister recognizes her brother just in time. Again, in the Hele, the son recognizes the mother when he is on the point of giving her up. This, then, is why a few families stand out, as has been already observed, as to furnish the subjects of tragedy. It was not art, but happy chance that led poets in search of subjects to impress the tragic quality upon their plots. They are compelled, therefore, to have recourse to those houses whose history contains enough moving incidents like these. My commentary is that we moderns really need to reconstruct, I think, in the classical Greek style, the entire Theban cycle of mythology, of which we only have a few plays. We only have a few of the classical plays of Sophocles, Aeschylus, Euripides that give us the story of Oedipus, the king of Thebes, Oedipus the king, the exile of Oedipus, the uprising, the exile and death of Oedipus, Oedipus of Colonus, the uprising of his sons, the seven against Thebes, the actions of Antigone against Creon, the Antigone, right? But Aristotle is saying we should look at the entire family history. So I suggest we really go back to beginning of the house of Cadmus. The marriage of Harmony and Cadmus, which is tragic. The necklace of Harmony, the appearance of Tiresias, the backstory of Tiresias, how Tiresias was transformed due to his hubris, was punished. The hubris and the hamartia of Tiresias, who was a male-identified, male, cisgender male, who was disgusted, who was walking in the woods with a stick, who was disgusted by the sight of snakes mating, how he beat the snakes to death, and it was because his prudishness was disgusted by the sexual act, and how he was punished by Hera, and in other words, that his prudishness was his hubris, his killing the sacred snakes of Hera was his hamartia, and his downfall, or his sort of partial nemesis, was that Hera then transformed him into a woman. And then later he is blinded, and he lives a supernatural life. He lives to be hundreds of years old in this blind and hermaphroditic state, but nevertheless, who through his wisdom achieves a type of inner peace and eudaimonia. So out of all of the characters in the cycle, Tiresias really is the central character who balances male and female, the hubristic and the eudaimonia, the sort of the positive and the negative, and who balances all of those polarities in one character. And we should follow the entire cycle of the family of the sort of the Thebaid, the family of Cadmus through the generations, and also look at the the family of Corinth, where Oedipus was raised, and we should, learn the birth of Oedipus, the Elias, the prophecy, why he was abandoned, because Laius got the prophecy that he would be killed, and by his son, which of course comes to pass. The youth of Oedipus, his hubristic arrogance and his own superior logical intelligence, his refusal to listen to his parents who tell him not to inquire into his upbringing, his running away, his consulting the oracle, arriving at Delphi, the teenage, or you can say the adolescent Oedipus arriving at the oracle at Delphi, being told his destiny but refusing to believe it, again in his hubris and his arrogance, being told to return to his former life, but in his hubris, his hamartia, he pushes on and comes to the crossroads where he fights a stranger who we later discover is his biological father, and still in ignorance arrives at the Sphinx, who gives the monstrous Sphinx, who gives the riddle, and then correctly answers the riddle but remains in ignorance of the meaning of the riddle. All of that should be done in a series of prequels, and if I had unlimited funds, I would commission filmmakers and video game designers to create that, with the actual settings of the historical. That I would love that, but bitter party of one. Okay, but if you would like that, respond in the comments. To me, this is something which has never been realized on stage or in movies or on TV or or in video games, and which to me is just a great story which is calling out, and I think Aristotle would agree. Okay, you might have other suggestions. My other suggestions definitely include the Paradise Lost narrative of John Milton, and of course the entire Divine Comedy of Dante. These are movies and stage spectacles that I want to see. It would be several evenings. These would be epics, not just a single drama. Because again, Aristotle talks about the difference between tragedy, which is the action of one day, versus an epic, which is unlimited in time, which goes through generations with many, many characters there. Okay, so as Aristotle said, enough has now been said concerning the structure of the incidents and the right kind of plot. Moving on to chapter 15, the second level of importance, the most important level of importance, again, for Aristotle, is that everything must support an excellent plot. And those were his summary of what makes a good plot, right? But then second of importance to plot is character. So the characters, whether we're talking about the classical characters in Oedipus, Jocasta, Tiresias, or whether we're talking about the contemporary characters in Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower, Lauren, Keith, the father, dad, the mother, Cora, the stepmother, Corazon. Okay, so what Aristotle has to say in section 15 is that in respect of character, there are four things to be aimed at. First, and most important, it must be good. Now, any speech or action that manifests moral purpose of any kind will be expressive of character. The character will be good if the purpose is good. The rule is relative to each class, and so it says, and so depending on like the goodness, wifely goodness, even a woman may be good, a slave may be good, even though the woman may be said to be inferior in terms of status and inferior breeding, and the slave worthless monetarily. The second thing is to aim at propriety. There is a type of manly valor, but valor in a woman or unscrupulous cleverness is inappropriate. Okay, again, this is Aristotle reflecting the sexist patriarchal culture of his time. We don't reject him just for that, but we have a historically situated understanding of his words. And thirdly, character must be true to life. I mean, I'm not an uncritical Aristotle fanboy, far from it, all right? I mean, Aristotle and Plato and Socrates, the whole Socratic school, were essentially enemies of Athenian democracy. They posed as critics of democracy as gadflies trying to make it better, but in fact, many of the students who flocked around Socrates were disaffected aristocrats who were trying to restore the old order. And Socrates must be and should be legitimately held to account for refusing to acknowledge that element within his student body. Of course, a teacher is not responsible for the criminal actions of his students, but a teacher must be aware of what's going on among his students. You know? And I do think that Socrates looked the other way. You know, was willfully blind to the treachery that was being perpetrated by many of his Athenian students and the Athenian uprising. So I am not defending the death penalty that was we normally just make fun of the death penalty, the cup of hemlock, corrupting youth. Oh, come on. Well, how is this great teacher corrupting? But there was a rational basis for his prosecution. So yes, we should read the Apology and the Critias, but perhaps we should balance it with other histories, such as the history of Xenophon, who had very critical things to say about Socrates, for whom he viewed essentially Socrates as a kind of a pimp. He uses that word. I love the teachings of Socrates as relayed through the Platonic dialogues. He is the father of philosophy, but he was a human being. He was imperfect. And the fact that his wife, who obviously he loved very much, Xanthippe, since they had a productive relationship, and otherwise he listened to her and was always fighting with him. And I think there is, again, I don't think Xanthippe was just a shrew or a harridan or whatever sort of negative sexist language you may throw at her. I think Xanthippe had legitimate criticisms of the way Socrates was relating to his teaching, to his students, and to his family. And especially in that sense that at the end of his life, at age 70, he really seemed to put his teaching first, above his responsibility to his family. He left behind 2 small young children, recently born, at the time of his death, and he could have forestalled that. He could have taken his family into exile. He could have raised his children. These are decisions. These are questionable decisions. So Socrates was a great man, but we should not make the mistake of deifying him or viewing him as a demigod or anything like that. So we should honor and love the greatness of his teaching, but we could still be critical of his weaknesses and his fallibility. Same is true of Plato. Same is true of Aristotle. And all 3 of them, the social critique of democracy in Socrates, it goes into absolute, dictatorship in the Republic of Plato. And in the case of Aristotle's tutelage of Alexander the Great, justified the imposition of the destruction of Athenian democracy and its replacement of that democratic republic with a military empire. And that same tragic transition occurred centuries later in Rome, in the collapse of the Roman Republic and the rise of the Roman Empire, and unfortunately has occurred today in the United States in 2025. But I'm not going to discuss current events. I simply want us to be aware of these transitions which happened in history and how we can see the present through the prism of the past. Okay. All right, let's speed through section 15 and get on to our main argument in section 16. The third, the character must be true to life, for this is a distinct thing from goodness and propriety as here described. Okay. Characters must be real and human. The fourth point is consistency. For though the subject of imitation who suggests that the type be inconsistent, still he must be consistently inconsistent. So, yes, people in true to life are inconsistent, but people's style of inconsistency is consistent. There's a modus operandi, which is, or a modus vivendi, which through which each individual uniquely communicates or exteriorizes their internal inconsistency. As an example of the motiveless degradation of character, we have Menelaus and the Orestes. Of character indecorous and inappropriate, the lament of Odysseus in the Scylla and the speech of Melanippe. Of inconsistency, the Iphigenia Aulus, for Iphigenia the suppliant in no way resembles her later self. That's very mysterious. The mythology of Iphigenia, her personal transformation. We can just say it's inconsistent, but I believe the myth of Iphigenia is a parable of the transformation of the sexual self at puberty. So I believe that the Iphigenia myth is a parable of female sexuality, that it's the burgeoning self-awareness of the woman-identified woman lover of the lesbian. Yeah. But anyway, let's get back to as in the structure of the plot, so too the portraiture of the character. The poet should always aim either at the necessary or the probable. Thus, a person of given character should speak or act in a given way by the rule either of necessity or probability, just as this event should follow that by necessary or probable sequence. It is therefore evident that the unraveling of the plot, no less than the complication, must arise out of the plot itself. It must not be brought about by the deus ex machina, as in the Medea, or the return of the Greeks in the Iliad. That's the famous criticism of the end of Medea, is that she's saved by the deus ex machina, the appearance of the god, and so on. But again, in a good production, that can be made thrilling and immediate, not just a cop-out. The return of the Greeks in the Iliad. The deus ex machina should be employed only for events external to the drama, for antecedent or subsequent events which lie beyond the range of human knowledge, and which require to be reported or foretold. For to the gods we ascribe the power of seeing all things. Within the action there must be nothing irrational. If the irrational cannot be excluded, it should be outside the scope of the tragedy. Such is the irrational element in the Oedipus of the Sophocles. So he's talking about the Sphinx and the oracle at Delphi, the supernatural elements, the sort of the prophecies of Apollo and the acting and so on. But we should have just what is rationally explicable. There's an interesting bit of dramatic irony when the appearance of the messenger in Oedipus, it appears to be initially a deus ex machina. It suddenly seems that a totally unrelated element, the messenger, is intruding into the drama, who is going to turn this tragedy into a comedy, into a happy ending. But that is soon dashed, and the apparent deus ex machina messenger turns out to be an agent of the tragedy, of the undoing, who leads to the, as Aristotle said, the ananorisis, the peripetia, the reversal, and the ananorisis, the revelation leading to the climax, and the climax leading to immediately to the catastrophe of Jocasta's suicide and Oedipus's blinding, and then finally the exile of Oedipus. Again, since tragedy is an imitation of persons who are above the common level, the example of good portrait painter should be followed, while yet reproducing the distinctive form of the original, make a likeness which is true to life, yet more beautiful. Okay, so to the poet represented the men who are irascible or indolent, have other defects of character, should preserve the type and yet ennoble it. In this way, Achilles is portrayed by Agathon and Homer. So this is a way of saying that our preference for especially good-looking people as actors. Aristotle's saying this is justified. That if we're representing a noble, tragic hero, that visually they should be physically beautiful, in that culturally normative sense, and that the negative characters should not just be if they are still have noble qualities in the mixture, that they should still also be beautiful in a certain way, if not flawless, right? Then these are the rules. These are the rules the poet should observe. Nor should he neglect those which appeal to the senses, although not being among the essentials, are concomitants of poetry. For here too there is much room for error, but of and this enough has been said in our published treatises. Okay, so in addition to the plot and character, don't forget the other senses. Include beautiful music, include beautiful clothing, include beautiful sets, include beautiful stage scenery, include beautiful stage spectacle. Okay. Moving on to section 16. What recognition is has already been explained. We will now enumerate its kinds. Recognition is the English translation of the Greek term anagnoresis, revelation of the truth, right? And so, first, the least artistic form, from poverty of wit, is most commonly employed is recognition by signs. Of these, some are congenital, such as the spear which the earth-born races on the bodies, or stars introduced by Carcinus and Thyestes. Birthmarks, you recognize that's often people are often recognized by a birthmark or something. Others are acquired after birth, and some of these are bodily marks as scars, some external tokens as necklaces or the little arc in the tyro in which the discovery is effected. Even these admit of more or less skillful treatment. Thus, in the recognition of Odysseus by his scar, the discovery is made in one way by the nurse, another by the swineherds. The use of tokens for the express purpose of proof, and indeed any formal proof, with or without tokens, is a less artistic mode of recognition. A better kind is that which comes about by a turn of incident, as in the bath scene in the Odyssey. The other types of recognition. Now, the scars in the Oedipus are never shown explicitly on stage, but he feels pain in his feet and he grabs his ankles in pain when the story of his infancy is being told, because his body is subconsciously reminding him of the physical abuse that he endured as an infant, that his ankles were skewered together. Yeah, so that's represents also those sort of, not a birthmark, but a something acquired after birth, and hence his name, Oedipus, swollen foot, big foot, because his feet, he had a swollen foot as a result of that damage done to his ankles in infancy, at birth. Next come the recognitions invented at will by the poet, and on that account wanting in art. For example, Orestes in the Iphigenia reveals the fact that he is Orestes. She indeed makes herself known by the letter, but he, by speaking himself, is saying what the poet, not what the plot requires. This, therefore, is nearly allied to the fault above mentioned. For Orestes might as well have brought tokens with him, another pictures, and so on. Another similar instance is the voice in the shuttle and the Tereos of Sophocles. Tokens, hidden portraits, things like that. These are devices that we see all the time in Shakespeare and Elizabethan drama and so on. Long lost siblings reunited, recognizing birthmarks, tokens, things like that. The third kind depends on memory of the sight some object awakens in the feeling, such as the Cyprians in the Diciogenes, or the hero breaks into tears in seeing the picture, or again in the Lay of Alcinous, where Odysseus, hearing the minstrel play the lyre, recalls the past and weeps, hence the recognition. The use of music is very powerful here, so I think that's, and also, seeing the portrait of like the dead ancestor or something like that. This is very visual, very sonic, and in terms of theatrical representation can be very moving. The fourth kind is by process of reasoning. Thus in the Choephori, someone resembling me has come. No one resembles me but Orestes. Therefore Orestes has come. Logic, right? Such too is the discovery made by Iphigenia in the play of Polyidus and the Sophist. It was the natural reflection for Orestes to make, so I too must die at the altar like my sister. So again, in the Titius of the Iphigenia, going back to my interpretation of the Iphigenia, the altar of sacrifice is actually that she's being sacrificed on the altar of patriarchy, Agamemnon, which is that he's forcing her to into a heterosexual marriage which she does not want. She is then mysteriously taken from that by the man-hating, goddess, and she is transported to this world of women. So I believe it's an allegory of the emergence of lesbian sexuality. That's my interpretation of Iphigenia. If you disagree, please comment in the live blog comments right here. But that's just my take on the Iphigenia. So again, in the Timaeus of Theodectes, the father says, "I came to find my son, and I lose my own life." So too in the Phinidae, the women, on seeing the place, inferred their fate. Here we are doomed to die, for here we were cast forth. All I have to say is I cannot wait to see the new production of the Trojan Women at BMCC in the new wonderful translation of Ellen McLaughlin in a few weeks. I cannot wait to share that with you. Okay. Again, there is a composite kind of recognition involving false interference on the part of one of the characters, such as in the Odysseus disguised as a messenger. Person A said that no one would be able to bend the bow. Hence, B, the disguised Odysseus, imagined that A would recognize the bow, which in fact he had not seen, and to bring about the recognition by this means that the expectation A would recognize the bow is a false inference. So he's using, logic and proposition A, proposition B implies this and that. Of course, the bow of Odysseus is also a huge metaphor, since it's a supernatural bow. It's a bow which is capable of murdering like all 50 of Penelope's suitors, right? But I mean, it's a super weapon, right? But of all recognitions, the best is that which arises from the incidents themselves, where the startling discovery is made by natural means, such as that in the Oedipus of Sophocles and in the Iphigenia. For it was natural that Iphigenia should wish to dispatch a letter. These recognitions alone dispense with the artificial aid of tokens or amulets. Next come the recognitions by process of reasoning. Okay, so I think everyone reading this would just agree with Aristotle, saying that the less contrivance in the plot, the more believable and the more heartrending the tragedy is. The more it is simply like a reflection of what would logically occur in real life, without these conceits of, hidden amulets, hidden birthmarks, all these sorts of things, which plague especially the Elizabethan and Jacobean playwrights, and many others as well. And where the sense of horror comes from the plot, not from blood and guts on stage, not from the horror movie effects or the Grand Guignol, right? But as Aristotle says, that's okay. You can have the spectacular as long as the spectacular is not unrelated. As long as it's a natural consequence of the plot, then the spectacular is fine. So you can have blood on guts on stage in the Oedipus as long as the main emphasis is on the working out of hubris and hamartia. Yes. I do not subscribe to the stage director's myth that we've all been raised on, that all of the bloody events must be invisible in Greek drama. I think that is a ludicrous myth that we got to put in the garbage. I mean, it's just like the idea that Greek statuary was all white and hence pure. Wrong. It was polychromed. They wanted their statues to be colorful and sexy and true to life, and that rubs modern people the wrong way, who have this very, exalted idea of the Greeks as sort of super people. They were super people in certain regards, but in most regards they were just like us. They were vain, they were rapacious, they were obsessed with very superficial standards of physical beauty, etc., etc., etc. All right? And again, that doesn't make their greatness less. It simply makes them more human, more like us. We can be like them. All right? We don't have to convert them into unattainable gods and say that we cannot achieve their level of greatness. We can. That's the point I want to make. I'm not tearing them down. I'm raising us up. And let's continue with a couple more of Aristotle's observations. I was hoping we would get to the end, but I don't think we will this time. Maybe we'll save a conclusion for November 3rd. So now we're in section 17 of Aristotle's Poetics. And now we're arriving at diction and lex and theme. So we've looked at proper construction of plot. We've looked at proper construction of characters. Okay, let's continue now. Okay, for theme and diction. So section 17, in constructing the plot and working it out with the proper diction, the poet should place the scene as far as possible before his eyes. In this way, seeing everything with the utmost vividness, as if he were a spectator of the action, he will discover what is in keeping with it and will be most unlikely to overlook inconsistencies. Okay, Aristotle is saying something super important about playwriting, and I think it lends itself to other art forms as well, is that a great playwright can actually see the play in her or his mind as if he were sitting in the audience, and is able to then edit and get rid of anything unnecessary. It has a visual sense, is completely visual, and this relates to earlier what Aristotle was saying, which was show, don't tell. Show all the action on stage so that even on the purely visual level, there is a unity that even if you cannot understand a single word, or even if your ears were, whatever, if you were, deaf or your ears were concealed, that you would be able to understand the action simply by seeing it. Everything would be visual. That's super important, all right? The greatest operas function as drama even when we don't understand the language. A person who does not understand a word of Italian can go to, La Bohème by Puccini and be moved to tears by the plot as it is represented by the actions on stage. Will understand the discovery of young love and the tragedy of disease and premature death, and all of that, is visually represented. And Aristotle saying this must be true of all drama, right? And since I gave a musical example, opera, in music, a great composer actually hears the piece of music. The music that you're hearing in the background is music that I composed because this is what I heard in my brain in some sort of state of meditation, and this is my recreation of those sonic brainwave states, and which are related to specific psychological and emotional sort of perhaps traumas and journeys for me, which I'm sharing with you. Okay. So back to Aristotle. The need of such a rule is shown by the fault found in Carcinus. Amphiaraus was on his way from the temple. The fact escaped the observation of one who did not see the situation. On the stage, however, the piece failed, the audience being offended at the oversight. So if you can't see what's going on stage, the critical thing, you're never going to get it, and you'll lose the audience. Okay. Again, the poet should work out his play to the best of his power with appropriate gestures. For those who feel emotion are most convincing through natural sympathy with the characters they represent. And one who is agitated storms, one who is angry rages, with the most lifelike reality. Hence, poetry implies either a happy gift of nature or a strain of madness. In the one case, a man can take the mold of any character. In the other, he is lifted out of his proper self. Okay. A happy gift of nature, one can create the character, or there's a type of divine madness where the poet, out of his normal thing, is able to create these life. So the gestures, the physical gestures, the movements of the hands, the body language of the actors on stage, tremendously important. And since we're talking about theater with thousands of spectators, an amphitheater, obviously those gestures need to be huge and bigger and visible from a distance. So that requires a tremendous bravery on the performer's part, that they're performing not to the immediate spectators, but to the far spectators, like to an audience of, say, 20,000 people in, like, the amphitheater of Epidaurus or something like that, or the Dionysia. Right. And that takes a special type of self-confidence and bravura. I think bravura would be the word. This is what makes a great performer in the opera house or in the amphitheater. Yes. As well as, of course, the projection of the voice and the authenticity of the characterization of the acting, just as Aristotle said. As for the story, whether the poet takes it ready-made or constructs it for himself, he should first sketch its general outline, then fill in the episodes and amplify in detail. The general plan may be illustrated by the Iphigenia. A young girl is sacrificed. She disappears mysteriously from the eyes of those who sacrificed her. She is transported to another country where the custom is to offer up all strangers to the goddess. To this ministry she is appointed. Some time later, her own brother chances to arrive. The fact for that oracle, for some reason, ordered him to go there is that the fact that the oracle ordered him to go there is outside the general plan of the play. The purpose, again, of his coming is outside the action proper. However, he comes, he is seized, and when he is on the point of being sacrificed, reveals who he is. The mode of recognition may be either that of Euripides or Polytus, in whose play he proclaims very naturally, "So it was not my sister only, but I too, who was doomed to be sacrificed." And by that remark, he is saved. All right. I like Sophocles' summary of the plot of Iphigenia here. The young girl is sacrificed. Why is she being sacrificed? She's being sacrificed by her father Agamemnon for his patriarchal war plan, right? Because of the troops, the ships which have been stalled at Aulis and all that. And she mysteriously disappears. So I said symbolically, Iphigenia is being sacrificed is the young girl being sacrificed on the altar of patriarchal militarism. It is a symbolic representation of what a patriarchal militarized society does to women. It objectifies them and destroys them, right? And she mysteriously disappears and is transported to this other country, which is the opposite, which is a matriarchal society in which all outsiders, in which men are banished. And when the man arrives, in other words, what is that? That is a metaphorical representation of the kind of the male excluding sexuality, of lesbianism, right? And when her brother appears, he's an enemy because he's male, but eventually he's reintegrated into the family unit as a non-sexual, as a brother, as a non-sexual male companion. So that is my kind of post-Freudian reading of Iphigenia, which makes sense to me. It may not make sense to you. Okay. Back to Aristotle. After this, the names being once given, it remains to fill in the episodes. We must see that they are relevant to the action. In the case of Orestes, for example, there is madness, which led to his capture and his deliverance by means of the purificatory rite. In the drama, the episodes are short, but it is these that give extension to epic poetry. Thus, the story of the Odyssey may be stated briefly. Again, here's Aristotle's summary of the Odyssey. A man is absent from home for many years. He is jealously watched by Poseidon and left desolate. Meanwhile, his home is in a wretched plight. Suitors are wasting his substance and plotting against his son. At length, tempest-tossed, he himself arrives, and he makes certain persons acquainted with him. He attacks the suitors with his own hand and is himself preserved while he destroys them. This is the essence of the plot. The rest is episode, right? And the Odyssey, to be understood, we should understand that Odysseus is he is noble, but he is not a virtuous character. Why has he been absent from his home for many years? Why has he been unable to find his way home? First of all, I mean, he's been waging war against civilians in Troy through, and he is a war criminal. He's the creator of the Trojan horse, which led to the massacre of civilians. The civilian population of Troy is, the walls of Troy are breached, and every last woman and child is murdered, except for those who are taken captive, like Cassandra, who's taken captive by Agamemnon, and who's ultimately murdered. But that's the story of Agamemnon. Going back to Odysseus. He is condemned to wander, and that is, what does that represent? He can't just find his way home. That is his guilty conscience, and that is his PTSD. He's not a complete evil psychopath. He is tormented by guilt, as represented by the monsters and the things which prevent him from getting home. But he is definitely guilty of war crimes. He is the war criminal. I think for that reason, this Dante very notoriously and controversially places Odysseus in hell. But he only places Electra in limbo. And I think that's really, these are sort of important distinctions that Dante makes in the Inferno. Anyway, getting back to Aristotle. We have to eliminate unnecessary episodes. Episodes must always be in charge of the main plot. The main plot can always be stated in a few sentences. If the Iphigenia is a symbolic allegory of the emergence of the gradual self-awareness and integration of the lesbian sexuality from the pubescent girl to the adult woman, then the return of Ulysses is an allegory of the obstructions of PTSD and of guilt by the returning soldiers from war. And okay, I think we'll just look at one further section and maybe call it a day. Let's look at section 18. Let's turn to section 18 of Aristotle's Poetics. Every tragedy falls into two parts: complication and unraveling, or denouement. Incidents extraneous to the action are frequently combined with a portion of the action proper to form the complication. The rest is the unraveling. All right, so the complication, the rising action, unraveling the falling action. So that famous isosceles triangle, the rising action, the falling action. By the complication, I mean all that extends from the beginning of the action to the part which marks the turning point to good or bad fortune. So the exposition, the episodes, the rising action, the climax, which is what forms the climax, the reversal, the peripeteia, and the reveal, the anonorisis, right? And the unraveling is that which extends from the beginning of the change to the end, to the falling action which ends in the catastrophe. Thus, in the Lyncæus of Theodectes, the complication consists of the incidents presupposed in the drama, the seizure of the child, and then again the unraveling extends from the accusation of murder to the end. There are four kinds of tragedy: the complex, depending entirely on reversal of situation and recognition; the pathetic, where the motive is passion, such as the tragedies of Ajax and Ixion; the ethical, where motives are ethical, such as Phididotes and Peleus. The fourth kind is the simple. Here we exclude the purely spectacular element, as exemplified by Phorcides, Prometheus, the scenes laid in Hades. The poet should endeavor, if possible, to combine all the poetic elements, or failing that, the greatest number of those most important, the more so in face of the cavilling criticism of the day. For whereas we have hitherto been good poets, each in his own branch, the critics now expect one man to surpass all others in their several lines of excellence. In speaking of a tragedy as the same or different, the best take is the plot. The best test to take is the plot. Identity exists where the complication and unraveling are the same. Many poets tie the knot well, but unravel it ill. Okay. How many shows have we seen that have a great exposition but cannot cannot untie it to the conclusion. Yes. All right. Tie the knot well, but unravel it ill. That is true of so many shows. Both arts, however, should always be mastered. I mean, you fill in the blanks. I'm not here to make negative comments, but we've all seen great TV miniseries or movies where the first half is like, oh, this is the greatest I've ever seen, and then the end leaves you totally unsatisfied. All right. But both arts, the rising action, the falling action, should always be mastered. Again, the poet should remember what has often been said and not make an epic structure into a tragedy. By an epic structure, I mean one with a multiplicity of plots. If, for instance, you were to make a tragedy out of the entire story of the Iliad, impossible, right? In the epic poem, owing to its length, each part assumes its proper magnitude. In the drama, the result is far from answering to the poet's expectation. The proof is that the poets who have dramatized the whole story of the fall of Troy, instead of selecting portions like Euripides, or who have taken the whole tale of Niobe and not a part of her story like Aeschylus, either fail utterly to meet with poor success on the stage. Even Agathon has been known to fail from this one defect. In his reversals of the situation, however, he shows a marvelous skill in his effort to hit the popular taste, to produce a tragic effect that satisfies the moral sense. This effect is produced when the clever rogue, like Sisyphus, is outwitted or the brave villain defeated. Such an event is probable in Agathon's sense of the word. It is probable, he says, that many things should happen contrary to probability. Not confusing epic for tragedy, very important. And I think this goes to the heart of our criticism of our live blogging of the opening night of the amazing adventures of Cavalier and Clay. That there were too many amazing adventures, that there were too many events in the plot, and the plot was stretching out over too long a period, from youth to adulthood and through up before the war, during the war, after the war, over basically like a 20 or 25-year period. It was too epic and not tragic enough. So the result was we did not feel pity and fear. We did not have the strong emotional response we should have, because the plot was simply too overstuffed. There were too many side characters, too many side plots. It was impossible to focus enough on the protagonist. I mean, there were two protagonists, so that was also a problem. And the reversals and the collapse. I mean, the real major reversal of the plot was for the character Joe Cavalier, the discovery of the death of his brother, and his abandonment of his love for Rosa, and his running away to the army. The whole plot should have revolved around that climactic point, that reversal, that reveal, and that climax, and that should have been the high point of the drama, followed by, but instead there were all these other subplots of the characters, and the emotional power was squandered, and hence the production had the spectacular, the visual element predominating over the other elements of plot, character, theme, and diction. Yeah, and of course, mellows. Despite the fact that it's an opera. So the proper focus was lost, and that made it a less satisfactory night in the theater. A spectacular night, yes, but there's more to theater than spectacle. It's not, if you want just visual stimulation, go to a museum. Yeah. Okay. Back to Aristotle. The chorus, too, should be regarded as one of the actors. It should be an integral part of the whole, share in the action, in the manner, not of Euripides, but of Sophocles. As for the later poets, their choral songs pertain little to the subject of the piece and to that of the tragedy. They are therefore sung as mere interludes, a practice first begun by Agathon. Okay. Yet what difference is there between introducing such choral interludes and transferring a speech, even a whole act, from one play to another? Okay. So, yeah, he's saying we can't have interchangeable parts like in a Ziegfeld review. The chorus is an actor in Sophocles, less so in Euripides. Euripides focuses more on the individual actors, so the protagonists, right? But a good production of Sophocles should keep the whole chorus on stage the whole time, experiencing the action, interacting with the action. Yeah. Actually, we have two choruses in the Oedipus, because in the prologue, it's a chorus of children who are brought by the priest, then they have to exit the stage, and then they are replaced by the second chorus of the elders, their parents, the elders of Thebes, who are suffering and dying of the plague. And then once the chorus of the elders of Thebes, of the adults, of their parents, arrives on stage, they should stay on stage to the very end, when they exit with Creon, who is the new king, and then at the very end, the stage should be alone, except for Tiresias and Oedipus, who crawls off alone, witnessed only by Tiresias. I think I'm going to draw the line there for today, and I think we'll come back on November 3rd for the next parable of the Sower update. But I think there are deep connections between the tragedy, the family tragedy as represented in Butler, and the elements of plot that are being of character and of tragedy. Parable of the Sower is a tragedy. It results, despite the fact that everyone is noble and good. The father is a noble, good character. The stepmother Corazon is a noble, good character. Lauren is a very great and good character. And there are good qualities in all of her siblings, even Keith, her nemesis, right? But that does not prevent the unfolding tragedies of the world from making it almost impossible for them to survive, as we will see. Okay. So we'll draw the line here. That was section 18, and continue in section 19, diction and thought, and moving on to rhetoric and lexis, okay, and so on. I think that'll be enough for today. So this has been the October 25th live blogging Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower update, seen through the prism of Aristotle's Poetics. I am Gregory Muna, aka Master Mu, and this has been Art is the Church of God the Creator. See you soon. Be well.